Good evening. Can everybody hear me? I am a grateful believer in Jesus. I'm living in freedom from drugs and alcohol, and my name's Neil. I just want to say real quick, I've gave my testimony a few times, and this time I wanted to take it back to the basics from how I really started. I just feel like people need to hear that, and it's good for me to relive it. So anyway, I was born into a military family. When I was about a year old, my dad was given orders from Vietnam, and we left North Dakota, which is where I was born, and we went to Great Britain. My mother, my sister, my brother were all born in Britain. And anyway, not long after my little brother was born, my dad was badly injured in the war, and we were sent to all places here, Arkansas, to Little Rock, because he needed surgery. He broke 27 bones. And I thought, none of us had heard of Arkansas, right? But my dad spent a lot of time in the VA hospital, and it wasn't long before my mother had a nervous breakdown. We were left with people in the military to look out for us. Now keep in mind, I learned to walk and talk in Great Britain. There was nobody there I could really understand because of the dialect. The language is different. So it was awkward for us kids. The military flew my dad's mom. She was Native American from Oregon. I was 5 years old at this time. I had trouble understanding people, so it was really hard for me to make friends. I was picked on because I was different. So I just tried to stay to myself. School wasn't fun at all. It was hard for me to communicate with others, and they put me back in kindergarten. At 5 years old in Britain, I'd already completed the first grade. I was mad about that. I did my best to get along. I became very frustrated at a young age. I wanted my parents home, or I wanted to go back to England. I hated my life here. When I was in the second grade, a man from the military bought us 2 ponies. I was so excited. Finally, there was joy in my life. It took my goal of needing friends away. I was happy. But even with being quiet, it just made me get picked on even more. I was getting very angry. When I was in the 3rd grade, some older boys, have any of you, your parents ever hold you by your hands and just spin you around? The older kids came down and they spun me around, but they were slamming my legs into this big oak tree. And but it bruised my legs really badly. I couldn't get up to walk, so they had some people take me home where my grandmother was at the house waiting for me. This was a key moment in me building anger. My grandmother told me no more tears and that I had to grow up and I had to learn to defend myself. I told my grandmother that I would not cry anymore, and I held that true for many years. By this time, my dad was walking pretty good, and he started teaching me how to defend myself, but really that only made matters worse for me. You see, I later avenged the boys who hurt me, and that's when my trouble really started. I got into football in the 4th grade and was good enough to make some friends. And remember the ponies we had? We sold them, and I was able to get a big horse. When I was 14 years old, I had a horseback riding accident and eventually ended my football career. It crushed my arm. I almost tore my elbow completely off. But getting out of football was bad for me because without football, I found a new group of friends who were a bad choice on my part. I'd already been sneaking around drinking beer at this point, but I had no idea what was in store for my life. Running around with an older crowd and sneaking to rodeos wasn't good for me at all. By the time I was 15, my drinking was completely out of control. When I reached the 10th grade, my drug abuse was getting fairly bad, and with the crowd I was hanging out with, my fighting also got worse. I wasn't the kind to back down, and getting hurt didn't bother me much. I could care less. In the 10th grade, it was hard for my dad to hide my troubles from my mom. She went back to nursing, and she worked the B shift, which was second shift. Back then they called it B shift. But anyway, I had good parents, a nice home, but I was just a problem child. About halfway through the 10th grade, I decided to move out on my own. After all, I didn't want to worry my mom, right? I stayed in a little trouble, but not so much. I did get into a few serious fights that landed me jail time, but I don't want to make my testimony a war story. Somehow I managed to graduate high school, but barely. After high school, I attended some vocational school, but drinking and drugging soon ended that. I met a girl when I was 21. She got pregnant, and my daughter was born soon, and we got married. My daughter was at our wedding. And it wasn't long after that my first son was born. Our relationship was kind of short-lived. It lasted about 7 years. I had stopped most drugs, but my drinking and working long hours took its toll, and we got divorced. Not long after my divorce, I got convicted of another DWI, and not long after that, a public intox. Between child support and fines, my life was a mess. A few years later, I met another lady, and along came my second and last son. That relationship was short-lived, and my son lived with me. She left me, and I really couldn't blame her. My attitude in drinking was turning for the worse again. When my son was, I'll say about 4 years old, he used to be a man. I lived out in the country, and this man would come by in a church bus, and he'd always stop and ask, could he take my boys to church? And finally, I said, okay, I'll let you go. I'll let him go, but I refused. I didn't know God, and I had no interest in learning. I thought God was only a myth. Every time that man would come by, I made sure I had a beer in one hand and a cigarette in the other. I didn't want to hear about his God. I would tell him, just leave me alone, much like another man you will hear about later. Kind of funny in a way. I did end up attending some cookouts at this guy's church. I was told, please come back, but without beer. Imagine that. Who eats? I mean, he invited me to a barbecue, so I brought beer. Thought that was normal. But at that time, I guess I just didn't know any better. I did end up attending that church for a few years, and I was able to stop drinking and using. And after a few years, I even taught kids Sunday school. Really, I learned more from the kids than what I knew, but it was fun. I enjoyed it. I was having a good time. And I was staying out of trouble. I had made progress, at least I thought. I remember, though, when the first Sunday I went, I asked him what I needed if I'd go on a Sunday, and he told me that I needed a Bible. So I brought my Bible. But when the pastor got up to preach, he told me to get out. He said, get out your New Testament. I thought he was being mean to me. It insulted me, and I got up to leave. Well, Frankie Ferris is his name. He got me and he grabbed me, and he's like, what's wrong? And I said, well, are y'all just picking on me because I'm illiterate? You know, but it turned out there's a New Testament and an Old Testament to the Bible. I had what I needed. So we laughed about that later. I don't get my feelings hurt much, but I thought they were just being mean, you know. So after a few years, my son became friends with a boy who attended First Bologna. So we changed churches. We had a lot of fun there, and I volunteered there too. See, I know God was using me then, even though I didn't know it. He was working in my life. But I got laid off from a job. I worked for 15 years, got into construction, and it wasn't long before I started drinking again. I ended up quitting church altogether, which was a big mistake. My drinking was getting worse than it ever had been, but somehow I managed to get by in life. As my drinking got worse, of course, more jail time would come also. In 2016, a couple of guys broke into my parents' home, and my dad said when they pushed him, he took a hard hit to his head. He started acting differently, so we moved my mom and dad into a assisted living home. Not long in the new home, in the new place, my dad was acting very unusual, and my sister and I talked him into going to the hospital to have some tests run. That night, he climbed over the bed railing and hit his head. You know, my dad was special forces, military, and I told them don't put the bed rail up. But anyway, we got another doctor to operate on his head, but they said the injury was too much, and soon he died. But that was a bad day for me. Sorry. It turned out to be more than a bad day. Remember the anger I had as a young man? I spent the next several months drinking heavily and hoping to find the people who hurt my dad. I started drinking day and night. I barely slept, and I barely ate. The alcohol was taking its toll. I got to the point that I couldn't go but hours without drinking, and I was starting to have seizures. I had a seizure while working at Children's Hospital. It was then a doctor told me the alcohol was taking its toll on my body. Looking back, the alcohol was the reason that I barely visited my mom. You see, I was focused on revenge. I was told if I kept drinking, it would soon take my life, and my mom would be at my funeral next after just attending my dad's. It made me think a little bit. I thought, how sad. I started attending First NLR here, and it was early, January of 2017. But I was drinking so much, I didn't get much out of it. You know, my mug was always half coffee and half whiskey. I love this church. I am positive there were many people who knew I was drunk at church, right? But that's another reason why I love this church, my church. When you come to First and Lahr, you matter. No pastor will tolerate anybody gossiping about. I'll just say us, those people, me. The one thing I forgot was Pastor Rod talking. The one thing I never forgot was Pastor Rod talking about CR. It was CR then, now it's Forever Free. My oldest son came to see me one night. I was wearing shorts and the back of my legs were so swollen and bruised, and I had no idea why. He tried to get me to eat, but nothing other than alcohol. I couldn't eat anything. It would come back up. Alcohol's all that would stay down. So soon after that night, my son took me to Bridgeway for detox. I was not happy about it. I wanted to leave the next day, but they brought the state police, came and told me if I tried leaving, I would be taken to the state hospital because I wasn't able to take care of myself. I stayed there. 7 days later, I was sent to a treatment center in Florida. I was glad to go to Florida. After about 3 days of detox, I was able to eat, and boy, did I. And later, I was told the bruising on my legs was my body attacking my muscle. I had no body fat. So my body was eating its muscle. It had no more fat to eat. They said my liver was damaged and my blood pressure was very high. But everyone in Florida was so encouraging, and I learned a lot. But walking was hard for me for a while, but I managed. I was too stubborn to get in the wheelchair. And there were mostly young people there, and some of their stories were just heartbreaking, to say the least. I started listening to them. Some young people got out and died soon after. One died at the airport. But I learned a lot in Florida. There were several good pastors, one who always encouraged me. After 3 weeks there, I had another 17 more days in Florida in the halfway house before I came home. I was blessed to have my job back. When I went back to work, not many people had much faith in me, but that was okay because I didn't either. I knew if I was to stay sober, I had to go to church. Remember Pastor Rod mentioned CR, Forever Free, again. I started attending. I would sit in the back and leave quickly. It wasn't long when this particular man started talking to me. I wasn't interested in talking to him or anybody else. I just wanted to stay sober. That was my goal. I wanted to stay sober for my mom. And I didn't think God would offer me much. After all, I turned my back on him. After a few weeks, I did start attending a small group, but I offered nothing. I refused to talk. And then finally, I started coming in here early to eat. And that's when a certain man started talking to me even more. Not long after coming here, I started a step study, which I completed. It made me realize I could have a better life. That man who I just wanted to leave me alone, he started talking to me more and more. Like, leave me alone. Anyway, and I'll mention this, and this is part of the reason. When my dad came back from Vietnam, he wasn't the same person. He wasn't the kind of person who was a hugging kind, and I wasn't the kind of person that liked to be touched by guys or even get close to guys. I've always struggled with really having close friends. It seemed like this guy was always right on my back, and I hated it. I didn't hate the man. I hated the way he got so close to me. And so, hey, this didn't work either, right? Some of my bad language was in hopes this guy would just leave me alone. Although I wasn't good at using appropriate language in the first place. If you think bad language will push this guy away, think again. Didn't work. That man who wouldn't leave me alone, he stayed on me. This man I keep talking about is Pastor Lane. Did y'all figure that out by now? Here's where we got to be friends. He asked me one night if I would start helping him in the parking lot on Wednesday nights. So I said yes. I was still struggling with my life, wondering how long I could stay sober. I asked God if he would put someone in my life that I could see God through. I prayed, and God's answer was Pastor Lane. Here we go. I knew then God had a sense of humor, right? But today, Pastor Lane is my best friend, along with another guy that I've known almost all my life. Them two are my best friends, but Pastor Lane I'm very close to him. I'm grateful for him today. I can now talk. I can tell him anything, and he keeps his word to never make me feel uncomfortable or untrustworthy. Work in my program has not only helped me, but it's helping me to help others. The Bible teaches us to love and to encourage others. John 16:33 is my favorite verse. Jesus tells us in this world we will have troubles, but be of good cheer. He has overtaken the world. Step 2 is a step I really like. We came to believe that a power greater than ourselves can and will restore us to sanity. About any power was greater than me at that time. But I chose Jesus as my higher power. Step 12 is my favorite step. Having had a spiritual experience as a result of these steps, we carry this message of hope and healing to others and practice these principles in all of our affairs. I see it as my duty to give back. I need you all in my life. I already had that. To me, working the steps is critical. Working the steps has opened many doors for me. You see, if I don't do my part in recovery, I will fall away from God. Loving God alone is not enough. I have to put out my part, my effort. And one of the most necessary parts of recovery is having a sponsor and accepting advice. I know my sponsor won't judge me, but he will tell me what I need to hear, not what I want to hear. A sponsor must be someone who will call you out when needed. To me, a sponsor is a coach, and needed for success. A team without a coach cannot succeed. I was able to get 2 years sober with my mom, and I had restored relationships with many people. But a big obstacle in my life was that I couldn't get rid of my anger. One Saturday night service, I went to the front, and I asked Pastor Rod to pray for my anger to leave me. It was controlling my life way too much. I prayed even more about my anger and God. God revealed to me that my faith was in man, and I needed faith in God. You see, a good of a man as Pastor Rod is, he is not God. Now, I believe it's the pastor's job to teach and guide and love us, but let God be God. To the newcomer, come to Ever Free or watch online. I like to tell people God is not a respecter of persons. He loves us all. It is not important where you are in your life journey right now. It's all about where you want to be. Jesus is not seeking the ones who think they are good, because none are good. We can only do a little better each day. Do you feed a newborn a T-bone steak? Keep attending Forever Free. Come to church on Saturday or Sunday. If you do not have a home church, give Pastor Rod and his staff a chance. Here at First NLR, one of our mottos is every soul matters to God. I believe that one of the biggest parts to recovery is knowing that you are loved. You are never beyond help. Our God still works miracles. So join a step study, now a process group. It's where you can deal with your hurts and hang-ups. Definitely go to small group. And here's what I like to tell people. Some of you need to change your surroundings. I had to. Do not put yourself in places you know are bad for you. You know, when I was in the treatment center, I heard a man say, show me your friends and I will show you your future. How true that planned out in so much of my life. Forever Free is not only about changing lives, it's about building new relationships. It's not healthy to be alone. If we fall, we need help getting up. We need to encourage each other. I'm not standing up here because I'm good. I'm standing up here because I have worked hard to focus on God and to try and take at least a baby step in the right direction every day. Everyone has value. Every one of you has something to offer, to contribute. People with a great deal of sobriety need the people who have little sobriety. I can never forget where I was a short time ago. This is the one reason the newcomer is so valuable. I know that most of you are not here because of drugs or alcohol, but anything in your life that is keeping you from the blessing that God wants you to have is sad. The more time we spend with God, the more he wants to bless us. That's my belief. Please don't let your defeats rob you of God's blessings. Work your program. Please keep coming back because it works if you work it. Look here. Just over, actually it's been closer to 8 years ago, I was close to death. I can't stress enough the importance of reaching out for help. God loves you and he still works miracles. I am 59 years old now, and I know this: it is never too late to start a new life. I believe Forever Free is for everyone, and God is always only a prayer away. You matter, you deserve a happy life. I want to say one more thing, and then I will close. One of my biggest thoughts was that since I turned my back on Jesus, why would he be concerned about me, right? Jesus loves us so much. He died on a cross for me and you. He did not die on a cross for us to give up. He died because he loves us, and God is a God of second chances. Never quit, never give up. Brush yourself off. Claim the victories God has in store for you. Before I close tonight, I want to talk about one of my favorite parts of my ministry that I'm a part of. It's the CSI program at Pulaski County Jail. Here at First and Allard, Forever Free, we take our process groups into multiple jails and prisons. I want to brag on the guys who participate, because they pour so much of their hearts out, and they put so much into it, and they put a lot of effort. There are so many people who make this happen, so I can't name them all. But I want to thank Ms. Kathy McConnell and Sheriff Eric Higgins. And for all that they do. And I want to thank Pastor Lane, too, for all that he does. He's making this happen. Thank you. Give him a big hand. He doesn't get to hear so much good. He hears a lot of bad. You know, it's good to hear. It's good to brag on him, son. I think it is. I brag on him. But I also am grateful to be a part of a church where those people are loved and accepted by our pastors. My sobriety date is May the 31st, 2017. Thank you for letting me share.